So I'm going to go off camera just so that we can kind of focus on the slides, and then we'll run in and do a little bit of a demo. But, I do have to say thanks. John is very humble, but he's built himself a little interconnected empire. One of the cool things is that drive of giving back to the community that John was talking about is apparent in every single one of these organizations, which is pretty cool. So why release a community edition? RITA's been out there for years. And for the folks that are, very happy at the command line, happy scripting things, the folks that tend to be kind of innovators and pick up on new technologies, RITA work fine. The problem is we don't have enough of those folks to do everything. So you start getting into folks where maybe they don't have that same level of bash skill writing capability that like Bill Stern has to be able to automate a lot of the RITA stuff. So that's where the graphical interface came through. And, one of the things we really try hard to do with this tool is make it as simple to use as possible so that it's not you need 40 hours of training just to have any shot of being able to use the tool like some of the commercial tools that are out there. We really want to make it simple and intuitive so that a junior level person, maybe somebody who's interning out of college can be your effective first level threat hunter. And now you only need to get senior people involved when they think they found something and you need to go through and run it down. So a lot of the reason for releasing the community edition was also the fact that it's starting to blow up. There's more folks like that. There's more of a need for graphic-based tools. So RITA, here's what output on RITA looks like. The bottom is AC-Hunter. Visually, I think this one slide really kind of tells you the difference between the two. RITA's awesome. I still fall back and use RITA. There's a little secret cheat code where you can use RITA with AC-Hunter that I'm going to show folks as part of the level 1 training. But for most folks, having the graphical interface makes life easier. So that's why we went down this road. So this community edition, what's the difference between that and what used to be called AC-Hunter that we're now calling AC-Hunter Enterprise? This really kind of sums up the differences between the two. So for example, the Enterprise edition, you can go through and you can have an unlimited number of Zeek sensors collecting data and bringing it in. For the community edition, there's only going to be one. If you take a look at this list, what we're focusing on is I want to do a proof of concept. I want to see if this would be a good fit for my environment. Okay, everything in the CE edition is going to work out just fine for that. Or I want to run it at home. I want to run this on my home network so I can get better at threat hunting and, understand what's going on. And this will be perfectly acceptable for that. Most of us don't use LDAP authentication in our home network. Bill might, but most of us don't. So not having LDAP built into the tool, into the community edition, not a big deal for most folks. But the enterprise edition, where you may have a couple dozen people using this tool, that becomes more of a requirement. So that's how we've gone through and kind of geared the two. I didn't want to do this as all slides. I wanted to be able to go through and do most of this as demo. So if you're familiar with AC-Hunter, this should look really familiar to you. The interface is exactly the same. You've got a little community edition thing off to the side. But beyond that, the look and feel is pretty much the same tool. The concept's still the same. On the left-hand side of my screen, I've got all my internal IP addresses ranked by threat score. On the right-hand side, I can go through and identify where did that threat score come from? Why is this stuff here? Some of the features in this thing, I'm just going to kind of run up from the bottom on the right-hand side. Triggered event on Canary tokens. What's that? So one of the things you can do with both the enterprise and the community edition is you can go in and you can say, I want to create a Canary token. If you're not familiar with what a Canary token is, think of it as like a little tripwire you can set up in your environment. So for example, I could go in and create a token that says, hey, I want to create an administrative user named John Doe. And that's not actually a real person. No one will ever use that account. That's going to be a tripwire so that if someone tries to authenticate as John Doe, I'm going to get an alert and find out right away, hey, this is something I need to pay attention to. The token ends up being a script that I can then go run on my domain controller that'll create the John Doe user that will assign a randomized 32-character password to the account. So nobody's brute forcing that in this lifetime. And then set up full monitoring for that account. So I might come in here and find out, oh, hey, 192.168.88.2, here's the name of that agent. Here's when they tried to log in as John Doe. Well, now I know, okay, that system's compromised. I've got a user that's gone rogue. There's something worth going in and paying attention to. I can also do this with files. My personal favorite is to do it on the net login share. Back in my pen testing days, once I got access to a system and I wanted to get the lay of the land, I went to the net login share and copied down all the login scripts. Because if I start ping sweeping the network or something like that, someone may detect that. If they have some internal monitoring, they may notice that. But if you just grab a bunch of login scripts off of the net login share, that's a file transfer off of what's usually a file server. No one's going to pay a lot of attention to that. And now you can go through those login scripts to see where are all the resources located within inside the environment. So what I like to do is create what looks like a normal login script that has a juicy name to it, finance or something like that. And then create a token for that so that it will create this file on the net login share, turn on full monitoring. And so long as I don't add that to anybody's profile, nobody should ever touch it. The only thing that might touch it is the backup system. And that's pretty easy to get around. And I'll show you that in a second. Now, if someone reads that file, makes a copy of it, I'm going to get a heads up notification. Hey, somebody was poking at that file you said nobody should be poking at. So I mentioned backup, right? The backup system is going to back up that server and it will read that file. How do I make an exception to that? You'll notice next to every IP and fully qualified domain name, this is one of the biggest differences from RITA AC-Hunter. I've got this little filter icon. I can go in and say, oh, hey, anything coming from this IP address, this subnet. So I can go in and I can create a safe list entry for my backup server. So now when my backup server reads this file, it doesn't trigger anything. But if some other IP address reads that file, now it'll go through and get an alert. So the safe list entries are a great way to go through and kind of trim out the work. Yeah, let's go down that rabbit hole a little bit. I've got an entry here, right? So I'm in my beacon screen. So what this is showing me is this internal IP connecting to that external IP. Along the bottom here, this is my 24-hour period of time. AC-Hunter is always going to show you a 24-hour block of what's up. And what's cool about that is when you go looking for beacons, really what you're looking at is this bottom graph, and can I draw a flat or close to flat line across the whole bottom? If I do, that's a beacon. I'm just getting multiple connections taking place. Hey, John.
Yeah, I just really want to highlight this, everybody. Like, this is really important because I hear people sometimes that say, oh, RITA and AC-Hunter only detect really consistent beacons. Look at that dispersion, folks. Yeah, it can detect jitter and absolutely can, and it does a great job. That's
absolutely. Yep. So jitter is that changing of the timing. And so the challenge within the industry on this is just about every network threat hunting tool, except for us, uses an algorithm called k-means clustering. That's K-MEANS space clustering, in case you want to look it up. There's a wiki for it, wiki entry on it. But basically all k-means is math. And it's math that can look for repetitive pattern in large data sets. So imagine you had 1 million connections go out to the internet yesterday. But buried in there is one IP address talking to another IP address once every second, right? Or once every minute, some repeatable interval, and it does it all day long. K-means will look at that and say, oh, hey, that's a repetitive pattern. You need to pay attention to that. So if it's not jittering, most threat hunting tools can spot that type of a beacon signal, no problem. Okay, here's the problem. Every hunt I've been on for at least the last 4 years, whether it ended up being a red team or an adversary that we caught, is jittering their connections. They're changing the timing. So instead of saying once per minute, they're saying once per minute plus or minus 50%, which means the delta time could be as short as 30 seconds, could be as long as 90 seconds. And the reason jitter exists is because anybody using k-means won't detect that anymore because it's no longer an exact repetitive pattern. K-means will ignore it. Well, if you're a tool that relies on k-means to find beacons, you need to find some other method to detect that beacon. And what most of them do is they fall back on writing signatures. Oh, well, signatures are great because you can only catch the stuff you already knew about. One of the things that was kind of cool was when Sunburst came out, right? So Sunburst was SolarWinds got compromised in like March, supply chain attack. They started distributing code in, I think, July that had malware in it. And in December was when FireEye said, hey, there's this thing we decided to call Sunburst out there that everybody needs to worry about. And in December was when most people would got a signature that allowed them to protect themselves from that. For folks using RITA and AC-Hunter, they started catching it in August, right? They started catching it as soon as they did the update. They said, my SolarWinds server is now beaconing out to an IP address in Europe, and it never did that before. And in fact, one of our customers actually went back to SolarWinds and said, what's up with this? And the support person told them, oh, that's not us. It must be some other software running on the box. So they didn't know what it was. They didn't know it simply knew it didn't belong there. So what they all did is they said, okay, let's put in a firewall rule. Don't let it out. And that protected them from being, susceptible to that malicious code. So the ability to detect beacons, very important. And again, anytime you see kind of a wavy interval down here, that's because jitter's taking place. This screen here is showing me how often different time intervals are getting triggered off. So I can see there was 6 connections that were 513 seconds apart, 7 at 543. You can see this is kind of varying out a little bit. I can also do an analysis based on session size. How big were all those packets that were going back and forth? This is cool to be able to go in and look for things like activation. So in this case here, every one of those sessions transmitted 78 bytes of data. But imagine I looked at this, almost all of the connections were 78 bytes, but I had 2 or 3 that were like 5 megabytes. What does that mean? Well, that means that C2 channel was activated. And whatever the activation was, it resulted in 5 megabytes worth of data being transferred. Attackers are really good these days. They know to encrypt their data. In fact, what we see more often than not is they encrypt or obfuscate their data and then run it through a TLS session. So it's kind of double encrypted, if you will, which means your chances of seeing the plain text inside are pretty much 0. But by using that session size, that can give you some pretty good heads up. If it's a small amount of data transfer, maybe they'll list files in the directory. Maybe they were looking at running processes. What if we've got like 100 meg customer database on that system? And your boss says, hey, did they get to the customer database? Did they get that out? Because if they did, there's all sorts of disclosure you need to do at that point, right? As soon as you know they got access to customer data. Well, you can look at the session sizes, and if none of them are 100 megabytes or more, you can look your boss straight in the eye and honestly tell them, no, they didn't get the database. Because if they did, you'd see that large file transfer taking place. So being able to look at size really makes life cool. One of the things I love about AC-Hunter as well is it pulls a lot of data into your face immediately. Like, we're looking at a beacon. Is this something I need to worry about or not? Well, if I look at the breakdown here, this is telling me, what ASN number this IP address is part of, geographically where it's located. It's telling me that there was no DNS query that took place. So if someone didn't look up a fully qualified domain name, it'll normally show that. Let's see if I just can't find you one example of that so you can see what I'm talking about. Oh, here we go. So see, like here. So the user's system looked up this Akamai address, and that's what caused them to go to this IP address. So it'll tell you stuff like that, which is kind of cool. It'll also show you, notice we're looking at the comms here. So what was the protocol that was being used? This can kind of help you kind of figure out what's going on. This is UDP 123. So that to me sounds like, okay, that might be a time server. How can I verify if this is actually a legit time server or not? Well, if I click on any fully qualified domain name or IP address, I get a little pop-up screen. And this pop-up window allows me to quickly jump off to third-party sites to see what's going on. So for example, I can go to VirusTotal, and this will open up a new pad or a new tab. And notice we see that this IP address consistently has been part of ntp.org. Okay, so now I know that's just an NTP entry. So I look at this and I say, okay, this is a false positive. All right, there's a business need for this persistency of connection, right? Systems need to be able to check their time. I don't want to see this anymore. I want to create a safe list entry for it. I want to create an exception for it. With RITA, you kind of had to write your own script to do that and do it in the background. With AC-Hunter, I can simply go in, click on the little filter icon, and I can say, oh, hey, yeah, I want to safe list that entry. And I'm going to say, yep, this is an NTP server. The entry is being created by C. Brenton. and he's creating it on 2023-02-23. Now I got a nice little history as to where this entry came from. And notice what happens in the background as soon as I click Safe List. Boom, the data is gone. That will never show up in a hunt again. So I only have to validate something once, and it doesn't score it and it doesn't show it anymore. Now, we don't delete the data. If you need to get it back, I can go back under Manage My Safe List. I can say View Edit. I can find that entry. Notice I got one in here for Skype too. I can just say nuke that. And as soon as I do that, boom, that data will come back. When you apply Safe List, it happens in all the databases.
The other thing is, can you go back to that beacon screen in the upper right-hand corner that you just had up there? You see where it says DEST? There's so many organizations out there and people that hear about the power of Zeek and how awesome Zeek is and how great Zeek is. And then as soon as they actually start playing with Zeek, they're like, what the hell is this? How do I make this work? And the other thing to look at AC-Hunter, aside from beaconing, detection, everything, is it is a great visualization engine and kind of a GUI front end, I hate to say it, for Zeek as well. So if you're dealing with lots of Zeek data or you want to get involved with Zeek and see what it's doing, that's what we're really pulling up for people to be able to see.
Especially if you're trying to run Zeek to try and identify when all your security levels have fallen apart and you want to, find that system that actually did get compromised. Going through the raw Zeek data to find that can be a real challenge. Doing it here, I mean, that's what the tool is really made to do. Another kind of tweak we do, we jump to the long connection screen. So we'll track length of time a connection's been open. And this is something that we do with Reader as well now, but we've been doing this with AC-Hunter for a while. Notice the state here is listed as closed. What's this mean? Zeek has one little Achilles heel, and that is it doesn't write data to its log file until the connection actually closes. So imagine I compromise one of your internal systems, right? And I use a long connection back to my C2 server to manage that compromised host. So that connection is open all the time. It's not beaconing. It's not, setting up a connection, tearing it down, setting up a connection, tearing it down. It just sets it up and leaves it running all the time. Zeek will see that and record it, but it's going to keep it internally in its state table, and it won't write it to its logs until that connection actually closes. So imagine I break into your environment. I run around on the C2 channel stealing data, and I'm doing it for like 3 months. And after 3 months, I decide, okay, I got everything I needed. And I start cleaning up as I back out of your environment. When that connection closes, you will now get a Zeek log entry that says, hey, this IP address was talking to that IP address for the last 90 days. Right? I like to refer to it as the 90-day surprise. And you look at that and you're like, whoa, wait a minute. I check my Zeek logs every day. Why is this the first time I'm seeing it? And the answer is because Zeek doesn't write anything out until its log entries or until that connection actually closes. So what we do is every hour when Zeek writes out its log entries, we make a snapshot image of the state table and we compare that to what's in the logs. And anything that is in the state table, but not written out as a log entry, we'll list here on the long connection screen. And you'll see it, the state here listed as being open. Anytime you read something in from a PCAP, which this was, they all end up showing up as closed. And they show up as closed because, hey, you hit the end of the PCAP. So we don't know what happened after that. But if you're using our live Zeek feed, you might see some of these connections are open. And that tells you, okay, right now that connection's been open for, almost 24 hours. An hour from now, guess what? You'll probably see it's been open for 25. An hour after that, 26, and so on there, and so on after that. But you get the same type of investigation screens we talked about. You can use it on the internal IP address as well. Let me give you a good example. So imagine I'm looking at this, right? I'm looking at this and I'm saying, I'm pretty certain this system has been compromised. One of the things you want to do is get a handle on scope, right? Is this the only box that they've whacked? Just this one, or are there 10 other compromised systems they may have hit that are all calling out to the same command and control server? Because that's typically what will happen, right? The attacker will break in, they'll compromise a single system. They'll then move laterally, compromise additional systems. The main system calls up at some heavy interval, like you see here, right? We've got like 830 connections going off each hour. That's a lot of connections taking place. So you'll see one box doing that. But all the other boxes they compromise, They only call home about every 6 to 8 hours, and they're there as backup. So the concept if is one of those boxes calls in after 8 hours and this primary has been offline that whole time, and it calls in and says, hey, do you have anything for me to do? The C2 server will tell it, yes, you're now the primary channel into the environment. Drop your dwell time down to like 1 minute or less and start calling home more frequently so that commands can be sent through you instead. We've all heard the horror stories of sites that found a compromised box on their network. They take it offline, clean it, and the attackers somehow magically get back in a few hours later. And they're like, oh, gee, how'd they get back in? They didn't get back in. They were always in. You just didn't find those other boxes. Here's how you do that with AC-Hunter. So again, I'm going to assume the system's compromised. This is a C2 server. I can go in and I can pick the deep dive option. And with deep dive is going to show me every single IP address that box is talking to. So in this case here, it's only this one. But if it's showing me 10 other systems, guess what? I need to go take a look at those 10 other systems as well. So this helps you get scope on that compromise pretty quickly. You also get some summary information about the connections that are taking place between them. I can also pivot. So pivoting just means, hey, switch to the other IP address I was just looking at instead. And this is my internal system. And you can see there's a lot more connections being recorded. Anything in white, like this one, this is our way of saying, yeah, we didn't see anything suspicious about this. Anything that shows up in orange, that's our way of saying, this looked a little suspicious. You know, there was something here that kind of triggered, you may want to go in and pay more attention to this. So it makes it really easy to go in and kind of run down what's going on with that host. So I'll get a summary here of the overall connectivity taking place. What did this IP address do communicating with the other side of the firewall? Here I'll get a breakdown on individuals, which makes this a little bit easier. Let's see, what's another fun one? Oh, let's talk about this. Let's talk about threat intel. Because I'll be honest, I am not a threat intel fan by any stretch. Threat intel was great back when I met John 20 years ago, when our threat vector was script kiddies living in the basement trying to own more computers than their buddies who were playing the same online game, right? So, so one of the things in my past was I was there with a couple of folks starting up the HoneyNet project. And when we first kicked the HoneyNet project off, one of the things we were looking at is, what are these attackers doing? And one of the things they used to do was they would meet in these forums with other hacking teams, and they would try and prove who owns the most systems. So I may jump into this forum and throw some insult at you like your mother is a llama. And that was literally one of the insults we saw one of them using. And now every bot I own will join that channel and say the same thing, your mother is a llama. So it was about mass propagation back then. That's not our threat vector today. Our threat vector today is, nation state, crime organizations. They have the finances to target you with specific malware, specific infrastructure. John, you that smirk on your face says, yeah, you've got something to add to this.
So I don't want to rip on any specific vendors because a lot of them do it. As Chris and I said, as we say a lot of time, threat intel is nice that it's baked into this, but there's so many vendors that are doing network detection response, and the only thing they're detecting is only thing they're doing IP addresses or domains. And
yes, we're talking billion-dollar companies, by the way.
Yeah, and that's, and as Chris is going to talk about, it's a modifier, but it's not the sole point of what we're trying to cover with this. So yeah, there's companies out there that are like, well, we do network threat hunting, and they're literally just saying this is on a known deny list. And one of the things Chris and I say is, by the time it's on a known deny list, like the majority of the damage that can be done has either already been done or is past at that point. So we're really trying to focus on detecting those more advanced attackers. So anytime you see anybody that's like, yeah, we do network threat hunting, push them. A lot of times just DNS lookups and, ooh, shiny. DNS lookups and IP address, and that's it.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if we included the hidden DaVinci mode with this, but yeah, we did. So if you don't like the dark background, it can go light. Yeah, so to John's commentary, right? So threat intel, not very helpful, because it was great back when it was mass propagation and that infrastructure might attack me as well as you. but today it's all targeted. So here's how we do threat intel a little bit differently. So there are two files you can append information to. One of them for IP addresses, the other one for fully qualified domain names or just flat out domain names. And when you get a hit, we add 10 points to that system and that's it. And the reason we add only a small amount of points is because my personal experience, that as well as many others, is most of the time when you get a threat intel match, it's a false positive, right? That EC2 instance did some nefarious stuff 3 months ago, but it's long gone. Somebody else has that IP address now, and it's actually a legitimate website. So how do I tell the difference between my client talking to a legitimate website versus talking to a C2 server? And the answer is it all comes down to the amount of data the client tries to send to that server. Think about this for a second. Your normal client talking to, let's call it an HTTPS server, because that'll be more data than HTTP. But you're talking to a legitimate website over an encrypted data. How much data does the client actually send? Not much, right? Client's going to send an SSL client hello, right, as part of the negotiation. It's going to send its user agent string. And it's going to send any URIs for data it wants to request. It's not a lot of information.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
I have a question. And I think it's an important question. Seneca says, how do you identify a beacon when the traffic is proxified? So the destination IP address that's seen by Zeek is the proxy. And this is kind of getting into proxies and CDNs and those types of things.
Yes. Yeah, I will definitely jump back into that in just a minute after I get through this. Thanks for pulling that one in. So I will definitely hit that one next. But for the threat intel, like I said, for a legitimate connection, the client doesn't send much data. So what we do is we add in 10 points and 10 points only. And then we start watching how many bytes does the client send to the server. And if it's less than 5 megabytes, which would be, hey, it's a legitimate website and I'm just viewing some pages, 10 points is all that gets added and that's it. Just enough to let you know, hey, you got a match against your threat intel list, but it's probably nothing you need to worry about. However, if that's actually a real, let's say, C2 session, and that client is conveying out information, it's going to send more than 5 megabytes. So once it exceeds 5 megabytes, we start adding in additional threat points. By the time it gets to 25 megabytes, we've added in 100 threat points. So the score on that system is jumped by 100 points. That makes it pretty easy to go through and kind of spot that. Now, to go back to John's question, one was, how do you deal with proxies? And we've actually got a specific module for that. So with this module, honest, I'm not evil. I love that domain. So what this does is this just looks at the SOX protocol that's going by to identify, hey, everybody who's going to this proxy server, but that traffic is actually going to end up going someplace else afterwards. Where is it going to tell the proxy server it wants to go to? So we'll actually go in and we'll look at that and we'll look for beacon type activity based on that or long connection activity based on that. So we have that type of capability built into it. To John's other question about how do you deal with CDNs? So to the best of my knowledge, we're probably the only tool doing this, or at least we're the only tool I've been able to find that I feel like is kind of doing this the right way. And let me give you an example of it here. So I've got an internal system. It's talking to cdn.onenote.net. Okay, that's obviously a CDN, right? Content Delivery Network. If I mouse over the IPs, notice what pops up. There's about, I'm going to ballpark that and say there's 8 to 10 different IP addresses that are associated with that fully qualified domain name. So one of the challenges we're running into today is attackers are getting smart and they're hiding their C2 servers behind CDN networks. This gives us two challenges. Challenge number one, the beacon traffic is no longer going out to a single IP. It's going out to multiple IPs. The second challenge is there may be legitimate traffic using those same CDNs. So for example, we've caught C2 traffic going through Akamai. Akamai is the biggest content delivery network in the world. I mean, even Microsoft uses them instead of their own stuff. They're that big, they're that good at it. So to see stuff going to an IP address that's part of Akamai, I need to be able to do two things. One is I need to be able to collapse down all of these multiple IPs, and I need to filter out all the legitimate traffic. And that's part of what we're doing on the back end on this. point to John, I don't think we actually patented this part of this yet. We should probably get something written up on that. And again, when John patents things, it's not, ooh, it's ours, go away. It gets released for free in our open source tools. And now somebody else can't take it away from the community at large. But yeah, that question about finding things that are going through a CDN, oh yeah, we got that built right into the tool. The final one, and I don't know if I have an entry here or not. Oh, I do. Cool. Well, actually, second to last one is Strobes. We have 28 different patents on the way we go in and we identify beacons. There's a lot of math involved with that. Math I will never understand. Luckily, my devs do. They're smarter than me when it comes to this stuff. But it's what gives us our ability to go in and do beacon detection. And again, we patent it to make sure that we can release this, not just in a commercial tool, but in free tools as well, so that everybody gets access and everybody can go through and use those. When you get a system that's beaconing a lot, what's a lot? Well, if you think about if a system is beaconing once per second to a host out on the internet, right? So imagine I've got an internal system creating a new connection to an external IP address, and I want to know if it's a beacon. How many connections do I need to see before, yeah, I know it is, I don't need any special math? Well, if it's doing it once per second, that's 86,400 connections a day. That's a lot, right? So what we do is I think the default is 150,000. So that's roughly almost twice a second. So if we see a consistent connection going off twice a second, we don't run it through our beacon math. We shove it into Strobes to say, yeah, you need to go in and pay attention to this, right? We don't need to analyze the curve on it and these, the consistency of the session size or any of that stuff to tell you this is a beacon. This is going off so often. Skip all the hard math, and it just allows the tool to go in and run a whole lot faster. The last one I wanted to talk about was the DNS module, because one of the common techniques for C2 is to run it over DNS. And if you think about it, it makes an awful lot of sense because if a compromised system starts connecting out to a new host on the internet, now that it's compromised, you might detect that. But if all that system is doing is more DNS queries than it used to, you may never notice that. Because what's the impact at your perimeter? Well, your DNS server is making DNS queries. It does that all the time anyway. So it's a real stealthy way to go through and run this. We have a couple of different checks we do to see, is somebody trying to run C2 over DNS? One of the side effects of doing C2 over DNS is you end up with a lot of unique resource records being queried. Think about it for a second. Imagine I query one.evil.com. What's going to happen? Well, my local resolver will look that up. It'll get back who's responsible for evil.com. It'll go talk to that authoritative server. That authoritative server is actually the command and control server. And now that information that got passed out is made it to the C2 server. The response coming back is the response that goes back to that client. Now, what happens if 10 seconds later, the client wants to check in with the C2 server again and again queries one.evil.com? Well, as most of us know, the local DNS server is just going to hand back a cached answer, right? Just say, oh, hey, here's what came back the last time you asked that same question. It's just broken that C2 channel. So what attackers do to make sure that doesn't happen is they change the query each time. So what those queries are depends on the tool. Sometimes it might be, obfuscated text that's getting passed along. Sometimes it's a, built-in code. It really depends on the DNS tool. But the one thing they all have in common is it's going to be unique each time. If you stop and think about how many hosts does it make sense for a domain to expose to the internet and have DNS accessible, for most environments, that number is pretty small, right? Think about your average kind of mom and pop shop, medium to small size company. What's their presence going to look like on the internet? Well, they might have a web server, maybe a customer portal. They're going to have a mail server, a couple of DNS servers, maybe a DKIM record for their domain. Hey, look, we're still counting fingers on one hand. In other words, we haven't made it into double digits. We're still in single digits for most domains. So this number is actually pretty small. So my rule of thumb is if I don't recognize the name, I want to see like 20 or less. If I do recognize the name, if it's a well-known domain like Amazon AWS.com, Microsoft.com, Akamai, okay, I might actually see a couple hundred in those instances there. And anytime something exceeds those thresholds, that's worth going in and paying attention to. So if I go look at my very first entry here, this is saying r-1x.com. Okay, that's a domain I've never heard of before. We resolved 62,468 unique resource records. That's a lot, right? That's a lot. That would be a lot if it was Microsoft or Amazon even. So that's our first red flag. We're seeing way more unique queries taking place than we expect. There was 109,000 queries total. We don't care about that. Sometimes a server is just really busy and we keep looking up the same server name over and over again. We don't care about that. What we care about is the number of unique records. The other thing we go through and look at is utilization. So let's take a legitimate connection like akadns.net. We resolved 125 unique resource records within that domain. Okay, this is Akamai. We already said they're the biggest content delivery network vendor in the world. The fact that we resolved 125 hosts in the domain, that to me sounds like a slow day. We had 3 DNS servers that went through and did those queries. Now, here's the important one. I had 13 internal systems that connected to one or more of those 125 hosts in order to access that resource. Well, this is how we expect DNS to work, right? We type a name into our browser, DNS goes out, resolves that to an IP address, and then we connect to that IP address that's part of that resource domain. Let's go back and look at that first entry again. With the first entry, I have one system doing the DNS queries, and that's the only system that ever accesses a resource in that domain. In other words, we looked up 62,000 resource records and none of our users cared. None of them needed to access any of those resource records. That doesn't sound right, does it? So that's one of the other things we look at as part of identifying C2 running over DNS. Let's see, what else is in here worth playing with? Oh, so data. So your data feeds. So there's a couple of ways to deploy this tool, and I'll talk about that at the very end. But when your Zeek system is collecting data, right, it's going to feed these logs in once per hour. That's going to end up in this localhost rolling data set is what I name. The first part of this is always the name of the host. This just happens to be named localhost. And then the second part of the name is always going to be rolling. But if I load up that data set, this is going to be what is being seen by that Zeek sensor. And this will always be the latest and greatest 24 hours. With the Enterprise Edition, we actually make a snapshot every day. So if you need to go back 2 weeks, you can. We decided not to include that in the Community Edition. And the reason was if there's something going on and you're grabbing this tool to help you figure out what's going on right now, that's going to be in that 24 hours, that which you're going in and looking at. But any of my data sets are going to show up here, so I can navigate here to go through and pick up on anything I want to. I have a couple of options for pulling stuff in. I can have Zeek feeding in data like we talked about, or I could pull a PCAP or Zeek logs. I could use SSH to copy those over to the AC-Hunter system and then just import them into AC-Hunter. So when I do that, that'll actually create a new database based on those log files I just pulled in. So imagine you're in a situation where something weird happened in an environment and they've got Zeek logs, but they don't have an easy way to go through and parse those Zeek logs to see if they can't figure out what's actually been compromised in the internal environment. Take those Zeek logs, copy them onto this, onto the Community Edition image, import those log files in, you'll get a new database, go in, do your hunt, you're off to the races from there. Pretty straightforward. So as far as the install goes, you're going to have a couple of options. One option is an install script. Right. So it's a binary you download. This will be the smallest version to be able to go through and get AC-Hunter. And what's nice about it is when you run it, you can install AC-Hunter, you can install Zeek, you can install SB if you want to try that. It goes through a list of a couple of our open source tools and it will install all of them if you want to. So you can have a fully robust, setup just based on all the open source tools. So that's your first option, download the binary or the install script. Option number 2 is we're going to make this available in a VM format. It's going to be a larger download. Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's going to be running about 12 gigs, somewhere in that range there. And it could grow larger if you end up pulling a lot of information into it. But it's a fairly large download to go through and do. But that's AC Hunter pre-configured, ready to go right off the bat. We're going to have a third option, which is also going to be a VM, but it's going to be one geared more towards that level 1 class that I talked about. That's actually going to end up being a little bit larger than that because it's actually running on Ubuntu desktop. And the concept is Zeek is on that system, AC Hunter's on that system. You can use Chrome on that local host to go in and access everything, but the download is going to be a little bit larger. Here's the link to get to the community edition. So if you go to the Active Countermeasures website, go under AC Hunter, at the bottom, you'll see community edition listed. Click on that, and that'll bring you to this page. It gives you a description of community edition and what's cool about it. And then after that is the download links. And then after that is all the user guides. There's even, I think, some support information that's up there and available for you too. So this page is going to be kind of your one-stop to kind of learn everything about this. One of the other differences between the enterprise version and the community edition is with the enterprise edition, we provide support via email, video conference, remote desktop if needed. With community edition, it's going to be a Discord channel on the threat hunting Discord server, and that's it. Just because, hey, we've got to do other things besides just help people. Hey, anybody in the background? I was trying to keep a half an eye on the Discord channel, but there's been a lot of conversations. Was there anything in there that's worth going back over?
Yes, there is. I've been capturing a list down at the bottom. So there was a few questions. Forgive me, I didn't capture everybody's names as stuff was scrolling by, but one of the questions we had, I think it was from James, was would the Syslog internal, I assume they mean server, to the host server see ACH alerts and events? So I think anyone who wants to ask a question, or James, if you want to give other detail, tag me at Ian Meyer, EANMEYER in Discord, and I'll be watching for that. So does that question make sense?
Yes, it does. So,
okay.
So first thing, one is, and I forgot to put a slide in on this. If you want a copy of these slides in Discord, one channel under where we're having our chat, the live, webcast chat channel, is the content channel. There's a copy of the slides there, so you can go grab that. But the question around, the Syslog alerting. So that is available in the enterprise edition, but not in the community edition. And the thought process on that is that in an enterprise environment, I'm going to go in, I'm going to do some hunts. And then if something changes, I'm probably going to have a SOC where people are going to monitor these types of alerts to be able to go in and see, hey, 192.168.1.50, its score just changed 50 points. I should go in and take a look at that. For the community edition, we decided not to include that in. So with the community edition, you got to go into the interface and kind of see what the scores are doing in order to be able to grab things that way. So short answer, TLDR, Syslog alerts available in enterprise, not in the community edition this time.
So we had another question. How exactly does this get plugged into an enterprise network? There's been a couple of questions around that are enterprise networks, multiple locations, and that's what we pay for. That's what we have people pay for.
Yep.
We do charge for that type of capability. So this is very good for tactical. If you're doing incident response, it's great for that. If you have PCAPs that you need analysis, it's great for that. You have a single location that you're going to watch, like your home network, which we are going to have a webcast on that.
Yes.
It's good for that. Or if you're trying to learn this stuff, like we're going to be running it in Chris and I's classes. So
how to attack your own network is a feature. We're going to be doing that as a web class.
It is a feature. So somebody said, can this be used in a CCDC environment? Absolutely. I would recommend, if you're doing cyber collegiate defense competition, set up Zeek and start capturing as much as you can. But remember, this isn't an intrusion detection system. This will capture the command and control traffic as well.
Okay. We got other questions here, and this one almost feels like a softball, but I'm going to ask anyway. Does Beaker play nice with the community edition, or is this reliant on a Zeek sensor alone?
Nope. You can, when you run the install script, one of the options it will give you is, do you want to install Beaker 2? Do you want to install SB2? And if you say yes, it will say, okay, what IP address do you want it at? And you can say 127.0.0.1 to put it on the same box that you're going to run AC Hunter on. Or you can say, 10.5.7.3. I want to put SB on that system over there. And it will say, okay, fine. And, everything will just kind of run from there.
And we're totally expecting that SB and Beaker and that whole ecosystem is going to change now that Zeek is integrating directly into the Windows operating system. So stay tuned. We're still waiting for the Zeek sensor for the Zeek agent for Windows, but that will change the game. I don't think just for us, but I think for everybody. So that is coming.
So, and John, I think you were the one that kind of tossed me the link on this. Microsoft does have a port of Zeek for Windows, but you got to compile it yourself.
Yes.
And which is not a problem. And I've actually got it to work. But my issue is that when you're still at the stage of, oh, hey, go compile this yourself, that's not really production ready, right? Yeah. You're not really at a point yet where you're ready to say, yeah, hey, everybody run this and turn this on.
Yeah,
but we are keeping an eye on that.
Awesome. So next question here was more of it was started as a question, then ended up as a compliment, but we're going to ask anyway so the audience can hear it. A question on rolling this out. Would you put AC-Hunter on a box with a network span port / monitoring ... But I found it in your pre-install docs. Awesome write-up and very clear instructions. So you want to talk about that for a second?
So thanks to Bill on that one.
Yes, thanks to Bill on that one. Absolutely. So yes, thanks to Bill and thanks to, I can't remember if it was Naomi or Lisa. One of them made me like an animated version of how it all works too, which is pretty cool. But yeah, typically what you'd want to do is put Zeek on its own box and have Zeek listen on that span port, collect up the traffic, and then send it to a system someplace else. Now, it's all a matter of context, right? If you're talking, oh, I've got a home network and I've got 300 megabit to the internet, yeah, run it all on one box. Don't worry about it. But if you're talking about, oh, enterprise environment and, we've got like a 1 gig link or something like that, yeah, I'm going to want Zeek and AC-Hunter running on different boxes.
Yeah, and it's like anything. The more data you send through, the more CPUs and the more memory you want on it. I've had
imagine how that works.
I've got a VM with 2 cores and 4 gigs of memory, and I'm trying to send through like 5 gigs of traffic through it. Your product sucks. It's like got to spec this stuff out appropriately.
Yeah, which is all part of that pre-install guide. Thank you, Bill.
Exactly.
Yes. All right. So next question here. We got a few more. So I think this probably falls under the enterprise licensing, but let's ask the pros here. How do I link this to my existing SOAR or SIM solutions?
So this one, correct me if I'm wrong, y'all, this one does not throw Syslog. Normally, what you would do with the enterprise version is it throws Syslog. So your SIM is going to accept Syslog. It has to. If it doesn't, throw it away. And
it can be Splunk, it can be an elk stack. It doesn't matter. It's going to take Syslog. Yep.
Yeah, and you just throw Syslog alerts, and then you would have to write a rule for whenever the alerts come in, how you want to handle those as well. So it's just another source as far as your SIM is concerned.
Yeah, you get to write up, you get to define what you want in your logging tags. So I think the default is AC-Hunter, but if you wanted to name it something else, you could. And you can also choose to include a link to the AC-Hunter interface so that when that alert entry comes in and you see, hey, 192.168.1.50 had a score of 100, it's now a score of 150, and it's all because of this new beacon. There's a link right in that alert that you can click and immediately jump into the user interface.
Somebody asked about a Docker container. We're getting a lot of stuff fast and furious. And Bill you already responded to that. AC-Hunter uses Docker containers already.
Yep.
So, yep.
Cool. So we got about 3 more questions. We'll try and get through them quick because we are just a minute over. But for those of us who have joined and have to drop, thank you so much for joining. We're going to hang out for a few more minutes, maybe wrap up these questions, but please come join us on discord.gg/threat-hunter and keep an eye out. There are links inside of both the Zoom chat and inside of Discord for the upcoming trainings, for the threat hunting zine. You definitely want to sign up for that. It is beautiful. I've seen some of the work that's gone into it. So it's amazing. All the links there for getting signed up for the training are right in there. So please do look at those. With that said, for those of you who have to drop, let's get back to Q&A. So we got 3 more questions here.
Actually, can I just hit one I saw go by because I want to make sure we catch it, which is what's the attack surface of AC-Hunter itself look like? Which, great question. we have this company, you might have heard of them, called Black Hills, I think is their name, and they do a lot of pen testing for a living. The difference with us is that while it's really good bragging rights if they can break our code. So yeah, they're the ones that beat up on our tool to make sure we have as minimal of an attack surface as possible.
Yep.
And if bad things are found, I know John won't let me live it down.
We did have another question. They were talking about the cost. The cost of it right now is pretty low. And one of the things we didn't get a chance to talk about is we are planning on raising the price for the enterprise version here, I think, in probably the next 30 days. And the reason,
hey, Keith, Chris, you hadn't heard this yet. Yeah, we're going up on the price in like the next 30 days. Surprise.
What we realize is
John and I had a conversation this morning.
a lot of our installations are very precious snowflakes. There's a lot of hands-on. There's a lot of like consulting associated with it. So we need to make sure that we incorporate that with the cost of it as well.
And it's an open site license. So we've got customers that run one copy on prem, one copy in like Azure or EC2. So we've got some large scale that we kind of deal with. So yeah, John and I have been kind of talking it through, and I think we're getting big enough. We need more development time, so it's time to go up on the price. So
and it's also funny, you talk about this. We have people all the time. They're like, "Well, could you set up a demo in our environment and get it running?" And we look at other vendors who do that, right? And there's one vendor, I don't want to name companies, but there's some companies out there just to set up a demo in an environment sometimes takes months to get it up and running. And for a lot of companies, that's really frustrating. And one of the things that we highlight is the ease of actually getting this up and running. So now if anybody's ever like, we would like a demo, it's like, there's a community edition, have at it. And it just makes that whole process so much easier. And I think any vendor that does that, it shows a lot of belief in their product as well.
But we're not charging $200K per software copy.
No.
When you look at the ones that will jump through hoops to do that, it's because they're going to bill you $250,000. We're nowhere near that price.
An NDR product that costs $250,000? That's insane. No one would do that, right?
To quote John Strand, we're cheaper than the sales tax if you buy their product.
I love that.
Very true. Very true.
Got a couple more questions here. What's the best log rotation interval, and how does that change per implementation?
So so with the Enterprise Edition, it automatically uses 24 hours. So what it'll do is midnight UTC, it will go in and it will back up the previous day, and the rolling will continue. So that rolling data set always has the last 24 hours in it. And then what we do is at midnight, we just say, okay, let's make a backup of the rolling and call that an archive version for that particular day. With the Community Edition, all you have is the rolling. So it's always going to be the most current 24 hours period of time is going to be in that database. We're not doing snapshot backups on it at this time. Part of the reason for that is that if you do that a lot, you lose all your disk space. We wanted to keep this light, easy to use at home, easy to try and, get through for doing like a proof of concept and stuff like that. So just working with the last 24 hours only makes that a whole lot easier.
Nice. All right. Last two questions we've got here, and then we'll wrap up unless there's some that pop up. So and this I think was answered in the Discord, but it would be really good to bring up here for folks that missed it. Are there traffic samples we can use to practice using AC-Hunter?
Yeah, we got a little bored with this one, but yes, if you go to the Active Countermeasures website and you go to malware of the day, there's a ton of samples that, Keith and Hannah and a bunch of people were literally going through and recreating malware or capturing malware traffic and running it through RITA, running it through AC-Hunter. And you can see exactly what it looks like. And I think it really also shows the efficacy of the product and how well it catches those things. Because Keith, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of them, it was kind of getting boring. It's like, we're going to do pity tiger. Okay, it's a flat histogram. We're going to do this. Okay, it's a flat histogram. We're going to do this. Yes, it's a flat histogram.
You're exactly right, because over a period of time, it was like shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, RITA caught this, AC-Hunter caught this. I mean, but it's still interesting and fascinating.
Yeah. And we had some people kind of springboarding off that question. They're like, does the BHIS pen testing team bypass RITA? The answer is yes. They absolutely do. Does
they try.
They do sometimes. We've seen misconfigurations where their data wasn't actually coming into AC-Hunter. And then we had those two employees, Mubix and Egypt, that came up with a new way of rotating CDNs and all kinds of stuff. And it makes our product better. So there's a really kind of fun rivalry, and it's AC-Hunter and BHIS. But seriously, if you want to get around RITA now, it's almost getting to the point where you have to degrade the usability of your C2 to the point where it's not useful. It's like
catch it that once per day. Yeah,
the Beacon's once per day. You got it. Congratulations. But it's just it's a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun with it, and it's just all about having a good time, I think.
Oh yeah, and to just kind of add to what John was saying, when you install the Community Edition, there are 9 test databases in there that you can go in and you can practice hunting on, see if you can't figure out what's inside of them. And then the level 1 threat hunting class, there'll be some other data sets I'm using as part of that. And I will kind of walk through doing the hunts on those with you. So if you're, kind of green at hunting and want to come up to speed, the level 1 class is going to be the way to go. And then once you graduate off of that, then, as John was saying, malware of the day, go hit that, pull down the PCAP file, run to town from there. And what's nice about those is that you can just grab the PCAP, try and figure it out. And when you think you have the answers, go back to that blog entry and see if you caught everything.
Or better yet, pull down the PCAP and just do analysis from the command line and see if you can find it. And then come back through.
And go back. Right.
Yeah,
all right.
One of the good things also about the malware of the day PCAP files is we have both a 1-hour capture and a 24-hour capture. The 24-hour capture is like gold. That's really going to show you if you can detect things.
Yep.
All right. So let's wrap this up with one last question here. Maybe one more, depending on how quick the answer is here. Does the 1 sensor limit on the Community Edition also include Zeek logs resynced over the box?
No. So you can, so the 1 sensor will feed into, let me pull that back up. So the 1 sensor is going to feed into the rolling data set. You can then manually copy over Zeek logs and, create a new data set to process those as well, but you're limited on 10 data sets total. So you may find yourself in a situation where you need to import some data, so you can just delete one of the canned data sets that's already here in order to be able to go through and import that in.
We really tried to walk the line of making it useful and functional for people. And yet, seriously, we've got to feed our children. We have this crippling addiction to Muppets, comics, and battle axes. So we have
giving things away for free.
Away for free. So, all right. Well, I got to get going, y'all. Talk to y'all later. Thanks so much.
Indeed. Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
All right. So I think the only last question we had there, let's see, where did it go? Scrolled right by. So, that was it. Someone was asking about a CTF. It'd be cool if there was a active countermeasures CTF. And I think we have something like that coming up.
So John mentioned battle axis. So I had to pull this out. This was I have the best wife ever. This was my Valentine's Day present.
Excellent.
Needless to say, I got to go do some axe throwing.
Ian, we put a link to the CTF that's up there already. You can use that right now with their login instructions for a read-only copy of AC-Hunter. And so the link is in Discord.
Beautiful. All right. Any final thoughts from the ACM team? Because this has been great.
Yes.
I mean, you had something like 1,000+ people watching for most of this, and there's still 600 of you hanging out. So any final thoughts from the ACM team?
I do. Actually, I do have something to say. If you're new to AC-Hunter, you'll most likely have a lot of questions. And I know nobody wants to hear RTFM, but we've had a lot of brilliant people spend a lot of time on the documentation, like a pre-install guide, the install guide, the user guide. A lot of your questions can be answered in the documents. So I say this not to say go away. I say this because it's going to help you. Yeah. And it's available 24/7.
He says this as, the next time you're in the bathroom bored, hey, pull up a user guide.
And we also want to make sure that because this is a community product, that we have community support as well. So if you look up just above live webcast chat, the channel just above is ACH-CE-support. And we hope that while you've got questions, you'll ask them. And if you've got answers, share it with your colleagues.
Yep. And then you can get involved and you can give Bill a little hand. You can give him a little hand with getting the talks done.
A little tiny one.
Oh, man.
Just a little tiny hand.
I miss my little hands. I just moved. Everything's in boxes. I don't know where my little hands are.
I got spares if you need them, dude.
Oh, awesome. Hey,
any other final thoughts? Because
every once in a while, I do need a little hand.
Yeah. Yes.
All right. Any other final thoughts from the team here?
All set.
Yes, before we totally go off the rails.
Sure. Yeah, right.
Thanks for taking part and giving up time during your day. We appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely, folks. Thank you. And like I said, you want a copy of the slides, that content channel right underneath the one we've been chatting in, you can grab them there.
From myself, from the Black Hills team, from the active countermeasures team, thank you for spending a little bit of time with us and hanging out. We hope you love the new thing and tell us what you think. Join us over in discord.gg, as was mentioned, discord.gg/threat hunter. That's in the Zoom in case you weren't in there the whole time. You're like, what is this Discord thing? Where do I go? Well, that's where you go. And you can talk with all these lovely folks throughout the year about it. So again, thank you for your time.
And if you learn nothing else in this webcast, don't let medicated goats into your front entranceway.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Maybe that can play at the beginning like Winamp. It's like, don't let medicated goats in here.
And for folks who didn't get that, you missed pre-show banter, rewind back, catch that too.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. We're gonna kill this one with fire.
Thanks.
All right. Ending webinar for all.